Hi everyone, I'm Heidi Nestler. I'm the owner of Wampaku Natto. Natto is a traditional Japanese fermented soybean, and this is how my product looks. You can buy it around Portland and Beaverton in supermarkets. Today though, I'm going to make sauerkraut, and sauerkraut, it can be as simple as just a cabbage and salt. So that's all you really need. There's salt in this ramekin. But today we're going to make it with some really great anti-inflammatory ingredients. Sauerkraut on its own is really a good part of an anti-inflammatory diet, but we're going to sort of increase that even more with some really great ingredients. So already I have chopped up garlic and ginger. You all know what garlic looks like. There's some ginger. That's actually a grated carrot in there, and that's more just for the color and sweetness. But on my cutting board, and I'm going to switch now to my cutting board view so you can see what's going on here. That is, that's ground up or chopped up turmeric. So the turmeric root looks like this, and it's often for sale right next to these guys, the ginger root. So sometimes one will fall into the other, but you can tell the difference. I mean, here I think it looks pretty obvious, but you can tell the difference if you just scratch, and you can see that there's a little, it's this lovely bright orange color. And so the turmeric will stain your hands and board temporarily. I don't know if you can see, I have a sort of almost like jaundice, but that's very temporary. So I'm just going to put this into the board where we're going to prep. And then I'm also going to start with my cabbage. So this cabbage, you can, I don't know, tap it like a watermelon. I can tell that this isn't super dense, but you know, all cabbages are going to be a little different. I've just rinsed this cabbage under water, you know, just under the faucet. And so, well, that was a terrible cut. Wow. Oh, well. Keep going. This is not rocket science. You're just chopping up cabbage. Just took the core out here. And then if you have a food processor and you want to put this through the food processor, that's great. You don't have to, though. So,
no, it's okay. Go.
Hi. So this is really easy stuff. You could work with other people, you know, in your household or bubble on this. It's a great, fun thing to do with other people. Chat. So that's it. We're almost through the first half of cabbage. And you can see I'm not super fussy about how I'm chopping this. It's just kind of, I'm trying to chop quickly because I know we have a lot to cover in our time together. So that will go into this large prep bowl. Now you see the size of my prep bowl is, it's big. So if you don't have this size, don't worry. Use like a mixing bowl that you would, you know, for baking, or I've even seen people use like the pot that they would use to boil pasta. That would work too, like a, whatever quart that is. So again, just taking the core out and chopping. So originally, fermentation was one of the first forms of food preservation. So we can make sauerkraut and it will last. Look at that big chop. That is just huge. Okay, it's all good. So just by using salt to coax the good bacteria, the bacteria that we want when we talk about a good, rich probiotic diet, in sauerkraut, we're helping that happen, helping all of those good bacteria take over by adding salt. So salt creates an environment where that keeps the bad bacteria down while the good bacteria have a chance to proliferate. I can never say that word. The more, someone say it. Proliferate. take over. The good bacteria is gonna take over. Yeah, okay. So just finishing up here. And it's this easy. You know, we have awesome local sauerkraut makers. You can buy good sauerkraut in the supermarket and you can make your own. You can do both. So a lot of us grew up with shelf-stable sauerkraut, and that's just a sort of pickling technique, but not filled with good bacteria. That's just using vinegar. So that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about lacto-fermented veggies. So you can see the volume here, and that's what I want you to see. That's one cabbage and some extra little goodies. And to this, we're gonna add some salt, about 2 tablespoons. I have to tell you that before I started teaching how to make sauerkraut, I really didn't measure. I would just throw salt in. So sauerkraut is salty. A lot of people are worried about that part. They're thinking, so this is all that we're doing. We're just squeezing, squeezing, squeezing. They're concerned about the sodium. So salt does play a crucial role with lacto-fermented veggies. You know, it's part of that process of keeping the bad bacteria down, letting the good bacteria take over. And, oh my gosh, I wish you could smell this. The ginger is so prominent. It's so lovely. So the amount of salt is concerning to some people, especially if they've been told to follow a low salt diet. And I would say, treat the sauerkraut like salt. Treat it like it is a condiment. You're having a small amount with your meal. So if you're serving a meal with sauerkraut, maybe you undersalt the thing that you're serving. For example, a soup or a stew, and you want to have a little sauerkraut on the side. I often have my sauerkraut just with eggs, so I wouldn't add salt to the eggs. I know that the saltiness is coming from the sauerkraut. And you're eating small amounts. So that's the other piece of this. So you can see already how it's reduced in size. This is where it's nice to have this big bowl. But I'm going to show you a little trick. And I often work with clients who are managing chronic pain. So this kind of motion might be too hard on your hands. There are things on sauerkraut pounders. You can, like, think of the blunt end of a rolling pin. You could let it mash down with this. The other thing is you can let time do some of this work. So you can see here, I have a much smaller prep bowl. So if this is the size you have, you might go with something like this. I salted this, so it was up to the tippy top about an hour ago, and I salted it and just gently mixed it. But I didn't do all that I was doing on this big one. And so the time has started that process. We're trying to break down the cell walls of the cabbage so that the liquid is released from the cell walls of the cabbage, and that creates the brine. So you can see that really shortens the process. So I don't know which one I'll continue to go with here. I'll just work on this one so you can see that. And I'm just going to move some of the goodies out. You can see already it's a little drippy, 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 but I want that to look like a really wet sponge that I'm wringing out by the time I'm ready to put this into my glass jar. So that's another point. We're fermenting in a glass jar, just on top of the countertop. If any of us grew up with grandparents or great-grandparents who were fermenting in the basement in a big crock. Basement's a great place because it's nice and cool, but that big crock was filled with the veggies for the sauerkraut for the year, right? But this way it allows you to make smaller batches by using a jar. And that's kind of fun too, because you can watch it on the countertop. Any questions so far? It's all pretty easy. This is really reducing in size. I will tell you that this cabbage that I used was part of a I was actually making coleslaw, like light vinaigrette, not mayo heavy coleslaw, but I had a bunch of chopped cabbage in my refrigerator. And I thought, I'm not really gonna finish that as a salad in enough time, so let me make it into sauerkraut. And my concern was that that maybe it had gotten a little dried out. It wasn't as juicy as when you cut into a cabbage and it's fresh. But this is looking pretty juicy to me. So you'd hear the sound change too. Can you see? Super wet. So I'm trying to create enough brine so that when I pack all these veggies into the jar, we'll have enough brine to cover all of the vegetables. That's the safety part of lactofermentation, is that all of the veggies are under their brine. So I think a lot of people, I think I was too, when I first learned about fermentation, it was really in Japan. I was living there in my 20s, and I was, well, if anyone has lived in another country, was often shocked by like, oh my gosh, that's not in the refrigerator, oh no. Oh. And I never, you know, like eggs, when they're fresh, they're on the countertop there. And all these fermented goodies in Japan were of course fermented at room temperature. And that was really a surprise to me, because I had really been raised to believe that all food needed to be refrigerated. So there's a great record of safety with lactofermentation. I think I had been concerned, you know, growing up with, my mom canned a lot, and there's always that fear of botulism with canning, and you know, there's education extension numbers where you can call and get advice, and you know, rightly so, there's a lot of safety protocols that you have to work with when you're canning. This is a different process though. This, you know, people have been doing this for millennia. You know, if they made jars, it was to contain fermented goodies long, long ago. So this is looking pretty good. I'm ready to pack this into the jar, and I just have a 2-quart mason jar here. And I might just tilt up the camera a little bit so you can see a bit better. Is that better? You can see. So I'm just gonna pack all of the cabbage in here, and you'll notice that I'm doing it over the bowl. This is going to help from making such a big mess in your kitchen. Now you need to pack this in pretty tight. You don't wanna have too many air bubbles. So that's why I think it's important to have a wide mouth jar. A lot of people like to save jars and reuse them, but for this kind of project, it's really helpful to have a wide mouth jar, simply so you can do this. And we're gonna pack some in. Now this amount of cabbage will, I'm mixing my projects here. This amount of cabbage will make a little bit more than what fits in a jar. And you're just, it actually, that one didn't make too much more. It depends on the size of the cabbage that you start with. So the one that I wanted, this one is a mix of green cabbage and red cabbage and carrots. The one that I want to show you though, that we have the recipe for, is this golden one. So this is just green cabbage, just green cabbage, a little bit of a grated carrot, the turmeric, the ginger, and the garlic. And another great thing to add to this would be some black pepper. So either when you're serving it or when you're fermenting it, the black pepper is going to help with the turmeric absorbing in your body to have those great anti-inflammatory effects. So you can see I'm pushing this down, and if I been clever and thought ahead, I might have saved a piece of cabbage about the size of the opening of the jar and used that. I'm not too concerned. I'm just going to rinse my hands. And let me show this to you. I'm going to stick this in a, this is just a plate or a shallow dish. So maybe like a pasta, a pasta bowl, something like that. I'm just, there's lots of messiness all around here. I'm gonna just stick that in here because as this is fermenting, it's going to bubble up. It's gonna be pretty active. I wanna cover this. So right now, if I press my hand down, you know what, a little bit too much cabbage. I'm just gonna pull out some. So I want the cabbage, this is best to really see here. You can see where the shoulder of the jar starts to go up. I want the cabbage really to come to about there, to the beginning of the shoulder, and I want the brine to come to that line, right? The first ridge of the mouth of the jar. So as is, unless I have a weight there, that's not happening. So I'm gonna make this weight here. I'm just gonna, it could be empty or full, be like that. So a glass that fits in. Sometimes you can also just fill a Ziploc bag with water, like a little sandwich sized one, and just pop that on top, and that's gonna create the seal of brine, I should say. And then over this, we're just gonna add a cloth of some sort. So, I forgot, usually I wouldn't use something this big, more like just a, but you could totally use a tea towel like this. And put a rubber band over it, or I'm just kind of tying it up so it's sort of like a little bandana there. And you know, do pick something that you don't care too much about, because as this bubbles over, it might get a little stained. And so what I'd like to do as well, I don't see, I'm missing my tape, but what I like to do as well is put a little tape, masking tape on there, or painter's tape with the date. So this sits on the counter just like this, and people ask for how long. And it depends on a couple of factors. So fermentation can be affected by the heat. So if your house is air conditioned, and you have a pretty steady ambient temperature, your sauerkraut will pretty much behave the same in the summer and the winter. But my house is not air conditioned, so it goes much faster in the summer. So if it's hotter, this will happen faster. The amount of sugar in here. Now, I didn't put any sugar, but I did put a carrot. So carrot reads as sweet in here. If you put a beet in here, a beet would be super sweet. That would speed up the fermentation. Sometimes people will add cut up apple, and that again will speed it up a little bit. And the amount of salt. So one thing I didn't talk about, and I'm back to this bowl, by the way, I just figured I'd work on that one. If you just want to taste a little, oh, that's perfect. It should taste like a salty potato chip. And I got that, I love that salty potato chip description. I got that from Sash Sunday from Holy Kraut. I saw her teaching one time and she said, it should taste like a salty potato chip. And that's just so descriptive. Sometimes you forget if you put the salt in, or you forget, you know, oh, I put 2 cabbages, what, you know. So you can use your taste buds to just do this. So that's gonna sit on the counter, I would say about 3 weeks, but again, all of those factors with the fermentation come into play. One nice thing about not having a crock in the basement and having a jar on your countertop is that as you're starting to ferment, you can just be super curious and put a clean fork in there and try it after 1 week or try it after 2 weeks. Just make sure you don't double dip. Make sure you get everything back under the brine. Now this one is one that I did says 7:23. Is that right? Okay. So I had some of this morning, so I don't think it'll do it, but oh, it did. I don't know if you caught that, but it made a psh. So it's still, once it gets to the point where you really like it, you would put a lid on it and put it in the refrigerator. And it will continue to ferment, but quite slowly. But that continuation of the ferment is where you get that psh. So if you've ever had like a jar of kimchi that you got pushed to the back of the fridge and you're like, oh, look at this. I mean, sometimes they can even bubble over, or you at least get that psh, so it will remain active. So this is the, so it's lovely. It's quite gingery. But it has that natural tang, that sourness. That's the, when we talk about lacto-fermented, it's the lactobacilli that produce that tanginess. So that's the sign that we have a good fermentation. It's also very acidic. And that's the means of preservation. That's why it's so safe. The fermentation process creates an acidic environment. So it's preserved through acidification. Yum, that is so intense. I love that. Yay. So that's the golden sauerkraut. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yay.
Actually, I have two questions. One is, when it's sitting on your counter, does it smell? Is it a strong smell at all?
Well, as a natto maker, it's hard to say. I don't notice a smell. Sometimes I will notice it bubbling over. And sometimes, you know, I want to clean that up a little bit. But I've not noticed a strong smell. And I should also say that sometimes you have the opposite of bubbling over. It might dry out a little bit. If your kitchen is hot in this weather, it might start to evaporate, in which case you kind of just press down more and make a little bit of brine, salt, and water and pop it in there just to cover it. Yeah. You had another question, though.
I do have another question. How long is it good for?
Very good question. Yeah. I mean, I would say, well, you know, what happens is I would say about 6 months. So if you're not consuming this in 6 months, you're not eating enough sauerkraut. But, you know, sometimes it gets, like I said, pushed to the back of the fridge or forgotten, and you want to try it. You know, as it's slowly fermenting, what may happen is that it's less crunchy and a little softer, but it still should be safe. You may see, and I should mention that when you're fermenting on the countertop, you may see some little funkiness that looks like pond scum. And that's probably Comm's yeast, or you might see some white fuzzy, and that might be just an overgrowth of the lactobacilli, the good stuff. If you see mold that you're not comfortable with as a color, or you know, you want to just take a paper towel in there and wipe it out. But basically, if you submerge everything, the bacteria should duke it out and take care of the bad guys. So it should be safe. But in terms of after in the refrigerator, how long it would last, I would say about 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Sometimes I buy kimchi or sauerkraut and I do forget about it, and it's like a year later and I'm like, well, it's fermented. So
yeah, no, I think it is very safe, but just if you have something really old, I would open it over the sink and almost very slowly. So if you start to crack it, you might hear psh,
okay.
You know, like give it some time, open a little more, you know, if it's that bubbly. Great.
Good advice.
Yay.
Thank you so much. This was really awesome. Very informative. Jill, did you have any questions? I don't think you put anything. Oh, you just said, thank you, Heidi. Can't wait to try it.
Oh, yay. Thanks for coming.
All right.
Alrighty. So we are at 1:30.